Tax avoidance and evasion mean that we have to ask more from working families, and that is not fair. Unfortunately, not enough has been done in recent years to tackle this injustice. HMRC estimate that £14 billion was lost through avoidance and evasion in 2008. Today we publish our new strategy paper on tackling tax avoidance, and we take specific measures to shut down the open abuses that have been allowed to continue for too long. We will close down 3 forms of stamp duty land tax avoidance, tighten capital gains rules for companies, and end the practice of disguised remuneration, which sees highly paid employees offer tax-free lifetime loans that are never repaid. And we're going to tackle the exploitation of low-value consignment relief that has left our high street music stores fighting a losing battle with warehouses in the Channel Islands. In total, on the numbers audited by the independent OBR, the tax avoidance measures in this budget raise around £1 billion a year, £4 billion over the Parliament. We are doing more today to clamp down on tax avoidance than in any budget in recent years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that gives us more resources in a fiscally neutral budget to help those families who do pay their taxes but who are struggling with the daily cost of living. We've already taken steps to help from this April. I'm glad to report that following measures in my budget last year, every local authority in England has chosen to freeze council tax in the coming year. Compared to the amount council tax could have risen by, this freeze will save a family in an average Bandy property £72 a year. In 2 weeks' time, the child tax credit for lower income families will increase by an additional £255. I confirm today that in the coming year, all workers in the armed forces, prison service, NHS, teachers and civil servants earning £21,000 a year or less will receive a pay uplift of £250. As I said last year, the national insurance rate rise, which the last government announced, will have to go ahead. But because we've increased the threshold, it will actually be cheaper to employ people on incomes of less than £21,000 than it is today. That's how we've stopped Labour's jobs tax. And anyone earning less than £35,000 a year will also be better off, because in 14 days' time, the personal income tax allowance, the amount that people can earn tax-free, will go up by £1,000. That's the largest rise in our history. And that means in real terms around £160 extra per year, or £200 in cash terms, for 23 million taxpayers. The coalition agreement commits this government to real increases in the personal allowance each and every year, and sets this country the goal that no one earning less than £10,000 should be caught in the income tax net. This budget today takes another step towards that valuable goal. I can confirm that from April next year, the personal tax allowance will increase by a further £630 to £8,105. That's another real increase of £48 extra per year, or £126 in cash terms. Together with this year's rise, a total of £326 extra money each year for those working hard to pay for their family needs. And it means just 10 months into office, this coalition government has taken 1.1 million low-paid people out of tax altogether. And one more thing. Last year, we restricted the allowance increase to basic rate taxpayers. This year we have not, and the result is there will be no more people pulled into the higher rate tax band as a result of this budget. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me turn now to excise duties. First, air passenger duty. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me be straight with the House. We had hoped that we could replace the per passenger tax with a per plane tax. We have tried every possible option, but have reluctantly had to accept that all are currently illegal under international law. So we will work with others to try to get that law changed. But in the meantime, we are consulting today on how to improve the existing and rather arbitrary bans that appear to believe that the Caribbean is further away than California. We will also seek to bring private jets, which pay no duty at all, into the scope of taxation. The wealthiest should not escape the tax that the ordinary holidaymaker has to pay. And I can tell the House that with the hefty duty rise last year, And with the cost pressures on families, we think it would be fair to delay this April's air passenger duty rise to next year. Let me turn to duties on alcohol. We have already announced plans to increase duty on the strongest beers and cut in half the duty paid on low alcohol beers. Beyond that, I can tell the House I have no further changes to announce to the rates of alcohol duty put in place by the previous government. As usual, these changes will come in at midnight on Sunday. As announced again by my predecessor, tobacco duty rates will increase by 2% above inflation. However, it's clear that the structure of the tobacco duty regime is being exploited to produce cheaper cigarettes. So we will change the regime to narrow the differential between these lower-cost brands and the rest, and between cigarettes and hand-rolled tobacco. This will reduce smoking and improve our nation's health. These tobacco duty changes will come into effect at 6 p.m. this evening. I turn now to other excise duties. Rates of vehicle excise duty will increase by inflation only, and we will freeze rates for heavy goods vehicles to help our hauliers. I am also proposing to increase the approved mileage allowance payments. This mileage rate has not increased at all since 2002, making those who depend on their car for work increasingly worse off. It will now increase from 40 pence to 45 pence per mile. And I can tell the House that we will extend this relief to cover volunteers travelling as passengers, as charities and others have been calling for many years. All other duty rises will remain exactly as planned by the previous government, except fuel duty. The price of petrol has become a huge burden on families. In the last 6 months, the cost of filling up a family car, such as a Ford Focus, has increased by £10. And this rise has also hit businesses hard, especially small businesses. And it's important that when shocks like the steep rise in the oil price occur, a responsible government is able to listen and respond. Let's be clear about what's within our control and what is not, and so we don't raise false hopes. British governments are not in charge of the world's oil price, and as we've seen, events like those in the Middle East can push the cost of petrol at the pump higher. But British governments are in charge of the duty that we levy on petrol. And the previous cabinet put in place, before they left office, a new fuel duty escalator that involved 7 fuel duty increases. 3 have already taken place, adding just over 3p to the price of petrol. The third step on the escalator is due to come into effect next week, and that would add almost another 5 pence to the price of a litre of petrol. I made it clear that I would listen to the concerns put to me by so many people. Many have suggested that we should use the extra revenues we automatically get from the North Sea. And it's true that they go up when the oil price rises, but the OBR confirms that rising oil prices also cause other tax revenues across the rest of the economy to fall by a similar amount. And I'm not prepared to undermine the public finances like that. Others in this House have suggested that we create a separate VAT rate for petrol. The Treasury, Mr Deputy Speaker, has examined this proposal. It would not fully offset their 5 pence rise that's coming. It would take 6 years to come into effect, and that's because it turns out to be illegal. So I have decided to reject this approach and do something different. Mr Deputy Speaker, the North Sea oil tax regime was most recently changed in 2006, when the price of oil stood at $66. It is now almost double that amount. That means that oil companies are making unexpected profits on oil prices that are far higher than those that they base their investment decisions on. Other oil-producing countries have a tax regime that automatically regulates returns when prices rise. We do not, and the North Sea is too mature to introduce such a regime now. Instead, we can do something else. We can introduce a fair fuel stabiliser. From tomorrow, the supplementary charge levied on oil and gas production will increase from 20% to 32%. Even after this, profits on a barrel of oil are forecast to be higher in the next 5 years than in the last 5 years. But this will raise an additional £2 billion of revenue. and we will use the new tax money to do this. First, we will delay the inflation rise in duty planned for next week until next year, and also delay the April 2012 inflation rise until the following summer. Second, the fuel duty escalator that adds an extra penny on top of inflation every year will be cancelled, not just for this year or next year, but for the rest of this Parliament. But I don't want important investment in the North Sea lost. So if the oil price sustains a fall below $75, and we will consult on the precise figure, we will reintroduce the escalator and reduce the new oil tax in proportion. That is how it will work. No escalator when the oil price is high, no extra tax on the profits of North Sea oil companies if the oil price falls and stays low. That's the fair fuel stabiliser. And this is the result for Britain's hard-pressed families. I've made sure that there will be no fuel duty rise this year. I've cancelled the fuel duty escalator when the oil price is high. And one final thing. As well as stopping these fuel duty rises, I am today cutting fuel duty by 1 penny per litre. This will take effect in petrol stations from 6 p.m. tonight. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I know that by itself this will not end the pressure on family budgets, but we've done what we can to help. Help for families, help for businesses, a government that listens and helps. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there were some who said this year that my job was to help families with the cost of living, and there were others who said no, my task was to back enterprise, support business, undertake far-reaching reform to help the economy grow. It is the central understanding of this government and core to our strategy that these are not two separate tasks. They are one and the same thing. We are only going to raise the living standards of families if we have an economy that can compete in the modern age. So this is our plan for growth. We want the words made in Britain, created in Britain, designed in Britain, invented in Britain to drive our nation forward. A Britain carried aloft by the march of the makers. That is how we will create jobs and support families. We have put fuel into the tank of the British economy, and I commend this budget to the House.
Under the Standing Order number 51, the first motion entitled Provisional Collection of Taxes must be decided without debate. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer please move formally? Chancellor? The question is that the pursuant of Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions. A. Increase in the rate of supplementary charge, motion number 8. B. The alcoholic liquor duty rates, motion number 10. C. Tobacco products duty rates, motion number 12. D. Amusement machine licence duties, amounts of duty, motion number 13. E. Field duty rates from the 23rd of March 2011, motion number 14. F. Stamp duty land tax, prevention of avoidance, motion number 49. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I shall now call upon the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move the motion entitled Amendment of the Law, and it is on that motion that the debate will take place today and end on the succeeding day. The remaining motions will be put to the end of the budget debate on Tuesday, 29th of March. Will the Chancellor please move the Amendment of the Law motion? Move formally. Yeah. The question is that the expedient to amend the law with respect to the national debt and the public revenue and to make further provision in connection with the finance. 2, that the resolution does not extend to the making of any amendment with respect to value-added tax so as to provide A. Zero rating or exempting a supply acquisition or importation. B. For the refunding an amount of tax. C. For any relief other than the relief that I, so far as applicable to goods and applies to goods of every description, and 2, so far as applicable to services and applies to services of every description. I now call the Right Honourable Edward Miliband, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor spoke for an hour but one fact says it all, and he couldn't bring himself to say